Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Dave from the camera store. Today we're going to talk about the Canon EOS R7 from a photographer standpoint. This is the Canon EOS R7. Now it's one of two cameras Canon released with the crop sensors for the R series lineup. Now it's very exciting because it carries on the same 7 number that was very popular with the DSLR cameras, the 7D and the 7D Mark II. Now those cameras are very popular among enthusiasts because they offered a higher level of performance in a very budget-friendly package. Now crop sensor cameras have a smaller sensor. In fact, this one we apply 1.6 crop factor to any lens we put on it. They're much more economical to produce than full frame sensors, and having that crop factor, especially when you're using longer lenses, makes this a very popular option when it comes to shooting wildlife. You get a lot more bang for your buck with your telephoto lenses because you're applying that 1.6 crop factor to every lens you put on it. So if you can't get close enough to a bird with a full frame, you certainly get a 1.6 advantage when you put it onto a crop like this. The other advantage we're getting with these cameras now is increased frame rates and a higher resolution sensor. This camera is going to be very popular with journalists, students, sports and action photographers, and of course wildlife photographers, which is part of the reason I'm coming to you from a yurt just outside of Calgary. Today we're shooting at the 2022 site for Mesca Outdoors here in Turner Valley. Now this is a great place to explore the rolling foothills of southern Alberta. This site is located directly behind the Eau Claire Distillery and the Chuckwagon Cafe here in Cowboy Country in southern Alberta. This is a great place to go check out and spend the weekend. This year Mesca is teaming up with Eau Claire Distilleries to offer some amazing experiences as well. From horseback riding to some amazing food, this is a great base camp for your adventures in Kananaskis country. If you want more information, check out mescaoutdoors.ca or follow them on Instagram and get a lot more details for this great starting point for an amazing adventure. It's very relaxing, this glamping business that we're doing. You can get used to this, it's quite nice. But we have a lot to talk about today. This is the Canon EOS R7 and it is packed with a ton of features, including a 32.5 megapixel sensor that is image stabilized, 15 frames a second mechanical, and a great autofocus system. But the first thing I like to talk about when I get a camera is how it fits in my hand and how I feel with my first impressions. When I first got my hands on the EOS R7, I was surprised by a couple different things. One, it's definitely smaller than the 7D Mark II. Now the 7D Mark II is a DSLR camera with a mirror and a prism, so it's going to be thicker for sure and overall slightly bigger, but I wasn't quite ready for how small this camera really feels. But it's not just smaller, it's actually significantly lighter. Even with the battery in there, it comes in at 610 grams. That's 50% lighter than the 7D Mark II. That's quite nice. If I'm going to be carrying this around and hiking, this is a really nice option to have, and it's certainly going to help me out on the course of a long day. But overall, I found the camera smaller than the original 7D and 7D Mark II. That's not a bad thing. It still has a very nice deep grip here, which gives me a very positive grip to it. Now, I do find that with my hands, my pinky just barely hanging in there, and I would like to see a grip with this camera. Now, no doubt there's going to be some third-party accessories out there, like an Arca Swiss plate built into it that gives your pinky just a little bit extra room to hang on to. But overall, this camera has a really good feel when you first grab it. Now, I do like that Canon is evolving as a company and their designs are changing with their growing needs. Now, with this camera being as small as it is, there's less real estate on the camera to put the regular buttons and their dials on, so they're getting more and more creative. So just to the right of the viewfinder, rather than down in the middle of the camera, we do have a control dial, and in the middle of that control dial, we have their 8-way control joystick. Now, at first, when you pick it up, you're wondering, how does that work and how does that feel, and is that going to work at all? And it does. It just takes a little bit of time, but you get used to it, and it's very intuitive once you put your mind to it. The other thing I noticed with Canon is that they typically put their on-off switches way out of the way. But with this camera, it's just above your thumb, so you can easily pick up the camera with one hand, turn it on, and start shooting right away. On the back of the camera, we do have a 3-inch articulating screen, which comes out to the side, which I really prefer. It allows me a lot of flexible viewing angles. What I do like about Canon is that when it comes to navigating the menu system, there are multiple ways to deal with it. We can use that 8-way joystick, the control dial, but we also have a very responsive touchscreen, which is a nice way to interact with the menu system. It is USB-C powered camera. You can also run the camera through a power delivery unit. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the viewfinder experience on this camera. Right off the bat, I do like that there's really good eye relief on this. That means that the viewfinder is pushed off the back of the camera a nice distance. That means I don't have to mush my nose up against the rear screen when I'm putting my eye up to the viewfinder. Now, here's where I have kind of a beef with this camera. I think Canon should have put a higher resolution viewfinder in here. It's 2.36 million dots, and it's okay, but we want to push technology a bit further. Come on, Canon, let's go up to a little bit higher resolution viewfinder. I do appreciate that they put in the power saving mode as well as the smooth mode as far as the viewfinder goes. That means it gives us a faster refresh rate. Very important when I'm shooting sports and action with an electronic viewfinder. It's a much nicer experience. Let's talk about the autofocus performance of this camera. It is a higher performing camera for sure. The frame rates, all that stuff really lends itself to high performance photography, sports and action, wildlife, birds in flight, that kind of stuff. So how does the autofocus compare? Well, what's nice about this camera is that right out of the box, this camera performs exceptionally well. What I like about it, it has inherited a ton of features from the much more expensive Canon EOS R3. Now what I'm finding with this is they've added some extra touches to it. The face and eye detection, of course, works incredibly well. Now, a really nice addition to the R7 is the ability to customize the autofocus zone. What I want my subject to be tracked in, let's say I don't need the entire frame, I know my subject I want to track is only going to be within a certain section of the frame, I can customize the length and width of that autofocus zone. And it's really nice to have that ability. I can save it as one of 3 different profiles. Imagine if you have somebody walking towards you in a modeling kind of situation with other people in the crowd. You can customize it to ignore everything outside of that zone and only concentrate on the subject matter that you're interested in. It's a great feature set that's really going to enhance the experience and give you that extra edge when it comes to autofocus. Now, it's very important to have great autofocus, especially with the frames per second that this camera is capable of achieving. Now, in mechanical shutter, we can shoot 15 frames per second, and electronic, we can shoot 30 frames per second. Now, this isn't as high spec as the EOS R3. It's not a backside illuminated stack sensor, so we do have to watch a bit of rolling shutter when we're shooting with electronic shutter. Now, I'm primarily shooting this camera in mechanical shutter, and the reason I like mechanical shutter is that I get some feedback when I'm actually shooting with it. My hands feel that I've actually taken a picture. It's nice and reassuring as opposed to the electronic shutter. Now, when it comes to shooting that higher frame rate, battery life certainly comes into play. With this LPE6NH battery, we are getting well over 600 shots on a single charge. I can attest to this. I have no issue at all with the battery. I've been shooting a lot today. Now, I do have a bit of a gripe with the shutter of this camera, and it's just a personal thing. I think the shutter sound could be a little more positive. Now, Canon will have the shutter rating on this as a 200,000 plus, but the sound of the shutter, I think it could sound a little more positive, a little more solid, but that's just a personal thing. But let's talk about the image quality we're getting out of the EOS R7. I was really excited to get my hands on this camera, not just to play around with it more thoroughly, but to actually get my hands on the files of these cameras and see what they're capable of producing. Now, we do have a 32.5 megapixel sensor that is image stabilized, which is a really nice touch from Canon. And what I'm finding is that if we compare it to cameras something, the R3, which is a full frame camera with lower resolution, but much better performing sensor, this holds up very well to it. When it comes to the image quality I'm getting out of this camera, it's really going to be subject to the quality of lens you put on front of it. I'm impressed with what I'm able to achieve with this sensor as far as the detail goes and the dynamic range and how malleable the files are in post-production. So after spending some quality time with the EOS R7 and finally being able to not just use the camera, but be able to look through the files and work with this camera a lot more extensively, what are my thoughts on it? It is a very feature-rich camera that's going to satisfy a lot of people's needs and take off a lot of check marks on the wish list. Now, of course, I want to know what you guys think of the Canon EOS R7. Are you excited about the feature set that they provided for the price point that they have? Are there gripes that you have with this camera that are the same as mine? Do you wish it had a higher resolution viewfinder, or does that matter to you with the whole experience? Make sure to leave comments down below. Follow us both on Instagram, and please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll catch you again next time. Hey, thanks for sticking around and watching our episode on the Canon EOS R7 for photographers. Now, if you want to check out more of our recent content, click up here. And if you are Canadian and you want to shop local, check out thecamerastore.com down here.